All right. Hi, everybody. This is the Exam 2 review of modules 3, 4, and 5. So I just thought we'd start off with this sphenoid bone since that was a tricky one for me when I was in this class, and this has a lot of the foramen of the skull, which can be tricky. First one here that I'd like to point out is the foramen ovale. Sorry, this one's the foramen ovale. This is the rotundum, and this is the spinosum right here. So they go rotundum, ovale, spinosum, ROS. These here are the optic canals. The bigger structures of the sphenoid bone that give it kind of its recognizable shape. All of this here is the greater wing, which kind of gives it that butterfly shape. And then here at the top, the lesser wing. The medial pterygoid plates down here, these ones, and then the lateral pterygoid plates on the outside. Those ones are also visible from an inferior view. This one doesn't have a great example of the sella turcica, but it's right here, just this kind of like little saddle. I remember when I took this, it was called it turkey saddle because that's kind of what it sounds like. Here's just another view of the sphenoid bone with the whole skull right here. You'll see these little lines, these little sutures. So that's the greater wing and the lesser wing. Here we have the optic canals, the foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, and the foramen spinosum, and the sella turcica. And actually in this photo, we can see right here the foramen lacerum. This one also has a great picture of the hypoglossal canals, which are kind of in the foramen magnum here. Here's just another close-up picture of the rotundum, ovale, spinosum, and lacerum. Those are the four foramens that you'll need to remember. The optic canals up here, sella turcica, the jugular foramen, and again, the hypoglossal canal. I've got a couple questions about the mandible and just like some of the tricky terms here. There are a lot of terms to remember and some that sound similar to other structures of the body. So we'll start with the alveolar process, which is right here with the teeth. The angle of the mandible, I drew a little angle here. So just remember that this outside part is the angle of the mandible. It kind of forms an obtuse angle. And then we have the body of the mandible right over here. The condylar process, which is this neck right here, not the actual condyle, which is just this top part right here, but the condylar process, and then the coronoid process. Make sure you put the R because it's not the conoid process, it's the coronoid process. And the mental foramen down here, they're pretty easy to spot. This is the ramus of the mandible. Again, the mandibular condyle right at the top, the mandibular notch, this little scoop right here, and then the mandibular symphysis right at the front where it comes together. It's better viewed from the anterior angle though. Next slide, we have an inferior view of the skull. This one has quite a few structures that may seem tricky at first, but the longer you look at it, the easier it may seem. The stylomastoid foramen is the first one I want to start with. It's this little hole right here. It may seem kind of weirdly placed, kind of far away from all the other ones that you need to know. But if you remember the structure that it's between and you remember the name here, stylomastoid, you break it up, it's the styloid and the mastoid process. Right here we have the mastoid process, and then here is the styloid process, and then in between those, the stylomastoid foramen. Next tricky part I wanted to mention that quite a few people slipped up on some of the module exams is the zygomatic arch. So this whole section, if it's all highlighted, is the zygomatic arch. It's referring to that. But this one right here, this is the zygomatic bone. And this process right here is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. Kind of confusing, but if you remember which bone it's connecting to is the process, and then which bone it's actually on is the second part of the name. So it's the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. And then right here is, of course, the zygomatic process of the temporal bone, because this wall right here is the temporal bone. And then those two together make the whole zygomatic arch. Let's see. Occipital condyles right here. Pretty easy to see right by the foramen magnum, the occipital condyles. Let's see, what am I missing? Jugular foramen. It's a little trickier to see in this picture, but it's right here. There is the mandibular fossa right here. So we talked about the mandibular condyle already. So right here is the fossa where that fits in and connects your jaw to the skull. And we talked about mastoid process already and styloid process. A couple other ones that I'm noticing here, you'll see there's the foramen ovale and the spinosum. Right here is the medial pterygoid plate and the lateral pterygoid plate. And then, of course, the palatine bone and the palatine process of the maxilla. There's quite a few terms from this view of the skull. It can seem overwhelming, but if you just take some time, spend a little bit to kind of just memorize. I like to do top to bottom for the holes, so I always list them in the same order so that I know which one comes first. There's the rotundum, ovale, spinosum, and then the stylomastoid down here. Here's a great picture of the carotid canal right here. So here's the foramen ovale, this foramen spinosum, foramen lacerum, which is highlighted here. Of course, the sella turcica, and then right here, the carotid canal on both of these. This is pretty easy to see since it's all zoomed in. Of course, the foramen magnum right here, and again, the jugular foramen. Ethmoid bone, just wanted to go over this one real quickly because it's pretty important. I forget about it a lot. So nasal bone, which is right here, which is what you'll feel at the very top, the bridge of your nose. You can feel that on your nose. The vomer, which is inside, right there. And the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. It's important that you mention it's of the ethmoid bone, just to be, more specific. Anterior nasal spine, right here, sticks out, pretty obvious. And tricky to see in this picture, it doesn't really have them, but the nasal conchae inside, you'll have to know those as well. Okay, so I got a lot of questions, like when I put out that I was going to do a review video, like, oh, vertebrae, go over the vertebrae. So there's 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, and then 5 lumbar vertebrae. These first 2 right here, this is the atlas, which is C1, and the axis, which is C2, or cervical vertebrae 2. Right here, the odontoid process, or the dens, and then the bifid spinous process. And you'll notice since these are cervical vertebrae, they both have the transverse processes here. The atlas is pretty easy to recognize, doesn't have as many structures as maybe this one does, so it's pretty easy to distinguish between those two. So just general structures of the vertebrae, we'll go over those now. This is the body here. And you'll notice the difference in size between this thoracic, this cervical vertebrae, and the lumbar vertebrae, the lumbar being the biggest and like the thickest and widest. The inferior intervertebral notches and superior intervertebral notches, I noticed, can be tricky. This one was hard for me when I was in this class. Right here is the inferior intervertebral notch, and this is the superior intervertebral notch. And that right there, that whole circle is the intervertebral foramen. Now, it can be tricky. You might think, oh, this is the superior intervertebral notch because it's above this one. But you actually want to just isolate one vertebrae, and then you'll see that this is the inferior intervertebral notch. Next term, the spinous process, which is right here. All of these, right, this one, and this one, which is kind of what you feel if like you're testing for scoliosis, or if you just put your hand on your back and you feel your spine, that's the spinous process. The lamina right here, which is kind of the process that connects to the spinous process. The lamina right there. And then a similar one, but not to be confused because it's different, is the pedicle, which connects all of these other structures right here to the body of the vertebrae. This is the pedicle. And then over here, it's visible just right there. On these, you'll see kind of as my arrow traces, that's the vertebral arch right there. And then, of course, the vertebral foramen, where the spinal cord goes through, which is only visible, not visible here, but only from an an superior or an inferior view. The next one, superior articular process right here, and then the superior articular facet. Be careful when you're naming these. The facet is where, like, kind of the surface where it connects, and then the process is just like the bony protuberance, I guess you could say. So this is the superior articular process, superior articular facet. This one down here is the inferior articular process, and this blue right here is the inferior articular facet. This here is the transverse process. So right there, here, 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 and here. And specifically on the thoracic vertebrae, it'll have a costal facet, which is where the rib will connect, the costal facet. Let's see. So right here, these are, yeah, same as this. It's the superior articular process. Those I noticed was tricky for a couple people. I think that's about it for all of the structures for the vertebrae. So we'll move forward then. So the os coxae, the super fun part, the pelvic bones. First one right here, actually I want to talk about is the sacrum. You have the anterior sacral foramen, and then on the back, I don't have a posterior view, but there's the posterior sacral foramen, and then on the posterior view as well is the median sacral crest, or make sure you write median sacral crest because there is lateral sacral crests. You don't need to know that, but the median sacral crest is important. Also, the auricular surface of the sacrum. That got confused with articular process a lot from the vertebrae, but it is the auricular surface with no T in there. That's right in here. It's not this line here, but it's where it connects to the pelvic bones is the auricular surface. And then, of course, the sacral canal through here that you can't see in this picture. So starting with the pelvic bones. In this picture, you can see, I'm just kind of going to identify, there's 3 different bones of the os coxae. There's the ilium right here, and then the pubis right here, and then the ischium. It's kind of tricky to see, but it's this part and then some stuff behind there. But there is the pubic symphysis, or the symphysis pubis is how it's said in the lab manual, and then the superior pubic ramus and the inferior pubic ramus, and then right here is the ischial ramus because it's on the ischium. Let's see if I'm missing anything else. This here, the iliac crest, just kind of this crest here. I heard a student say that helped them remember it because it's like the sunrise or the sunset over the iliac crest. I thought that was kind of funny. Let's see, iliac fossa, just this space right here where it kind of caves in, the iliac fossa. Let's go to the next picture. This will kind of help better so you can understand that this is the pubis. Here's the ischium and the ilium, the iliac crest again. The biggest concern that I saw, or that a lot of people were asking me about, is like, how do I tell if it's the anterior inferior iliac spine or the posterior inferior iliac spine and all that stuff? So the best way that I know how to do this is you have to remember that acetabulum is always lateral, and then the pubis is always going to be anterior. So that way you can kind of orient yourself, and also that the notches, the lesser and the greater sciatic notches, are going to be posterior. So then you'll see that the posterior superior iliac spine and the posterior inferior iliac spine are above the greater sciatic notch here. And then the anterior superior iliac spine and the anterior inferior iliac spine on the anterior side where the pubis is. This right here in between the greater and the lesser sciatic notches is the ischial spine, ischial tuberosity down here, obturator foramen. Let's see. There's a couple other views I have of this one. Here's a better view kind of the greater sciatic notch and the lesser sciatic notch. Here's the pubis. Here's the anterior, superior, and inferior iliac spines and the posterior spines. It's getting hard to say that. It's kind of a mouthful. Let's let's see. Don't think I missed anything here. Real quickly. Auricular surface. Okay, yeah. So this here is the auricular surface where it connects to the sacrum. So the sacrum has an auricular surface and the os coxae have an auricular surface. I think that's everything. Okay. Let's go to the tibia. I got a couple questions about this one, which is understandable. This one can be kind of tricky just to understand if it's left or if it's right or if you're what are you looking at here? So the anterior crest is a really helpful landmark for the anterior view of the tibia. It's more obvious on a real bone, like if you can touch it, you can feel it pretty obvious. It's a pretty sharp crest there. The fibular notch, which is most visible down here with the, oh, has that been there the whole time? Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. So this right here is the fibular notch right there. And then of course we have the medial malleolus. This is going to help you a lot when you're deciding which is lateral, which is medial, and then you can decide if it's a left or a right tibia. This one is going to be a right tibia since this is medial. You can actually feel that on your ankle, the medial side of your ankle. And then once you know medial malleolus, you can go directly up, and this is the medial condyle. And of course, this one's the lateral condyle. And then the intercondylar eminence right here. Intercondylar eminence. I think that's about it for the tibia. All right. So I want to go over quickly the tarsals and the carpals just because that's kind of a tricky one for me, especially when I was naming bones. And I saw a couple of problem areas here. So right here is the navicular. Sorry, it's not a super clear picture. The talus and the calcaneus, which is huge. It's like what you feel when you feel your heel. The cuboid. And then these cuneiforms are kind of tricky because a lot of people wanted to say that this one right here was the medial cuneiform, but you got to remember that medial is not the same as middle. So this one is actually the medial cuneiform. And this one here is the intermediate cuneiform. And this is the lateral cuneiform because it's most lateral of the three. And then here we have the carpal bones. So I've never had I've heard a lot of acronyms for these just to help remember, but I don't know. That's never super worked for me, but if that's your thing, totally go for it. Make up an acronym. This one here is the scaphoid. This one here is the lunate, which has been always obvious to me because it has, especially in this picture, these craters right here. Reminds you of the moon, lunar, lunate. So that's the lunate bone. Right here you have the triquetrum. And then behind that, which is only visible from the palmar view right here, or the anterior view in anatomical position, is this one right here. It's the pisiform. Next one we have is the hamate. Again, this has a pretty easy structure to help identify it, but it's only visible from the palmar view. Is the hook right here. It's this little, I don't know, it's hard to see because it's in blue, but it's the hook of the hamate. So that just kind of has always helped me remember. It's the hook of the hamate right there. And then this one in the middle, the pretty big one, is the capitate. This one right here by your pointer finger is the trapezoid. And then this one by the thumb is the trapezium. That one, excuse me, it's pretty easy for me to remember just because I always thought, oh, you can't do trapeze without your thumbs, the trapezium. Scaphoid's pretty easy to remember just because that's one of the most common breaks in the wrist. Like when people try and catch themselves with their hands, is they can fracture their scaphoid. Lunate's got the craters. Pisiform is the smallest one. That's just kind of a couple things that help me remember those. So if you guys have, that's the end of my video here. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and put them down below. If there's anything you missed, if you want to know about, let me know, ask questions, just participate in the discussion boards. The other students will probably have some answers for you if I can't answer your question. But thanks so much for watching and good luck on your test.